Welcome back to the Beyond Broadcast podcast, a show which takes a behind-the-scenes look at industry professionals and their lives working in the broadcasting and entertainment industry. Today, I'm speaking with Francis Glenday. With more than 20 years in the industry, Francis has worked on a variety of projects covering TVC, feature films, docos, shows, and animation. Francis has been the digital scissors, with the majority of his work being locally made productions and Kiwi-centric projects. Welcome to the show, Francis. It's such a pleasure to meet you. We've had an absolute rigmarole of tech problems and everything else in between, so I just have to commend you on your patience, mate.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun, hasn't it? I haven't had this much fun trying to troubleshoot a technical problem in years.
Well, I'm glad I'll add to it, mate. That's for sure. And we'll kick it off. We've probably been through this question a million times in its own right, but, we'll start off at where better else than the beginning, which is, you've once described yourself as someone who always loved stories, from watching films with your grandma to creating your own comic books. What do you think sparked that early love of storytelling for you?
I kind of, when you asked me this question in the first run through, you actually caught me kind of by surprise, because I never really stopped to think about it in that kind of way. I guess it was kind of an interest that was always there. And when I mean always there, like, I've got memories of being 4 or 5 years old and just sitting endlessly drawing. That's what I like to do, was to draw. And I would make little comic books and do stuff like that. I mean, it probably doesn't hurt that my paternal grandmother, who would have killed me if I'd ever referred to her as grandma, by the way, I had to call her by her first name. She was a reasonably celebrated New Zealand author. So she won the Auckland Centenary Book Award in the early 70s and published a lot of short stories and things like that. So maybe it's a little bit in the genes. I don't know. It just, like I say, it's just kind of been a sort of fixation for me most of my life. I don't know why. It just kind of has been.
Well, I guess in that respect, I need to ask, who was your grandmother and what celebrated author was she?
Alice Glenday, so celebrated in a small New Zealand sort of way. So she wrote a couple of novels, one which won the Auckland Centenary Book Award, I think, in 1970 or 72. She wrote a lot of short stories, won a few awards with that. The last novel that she published, which was really a collection of short stories that were intertwined, would have been 1990, so it's quite a while ago.
It's funny because you talk about this and the whole idea that it was probably your grandmother that introduced you into storytelling, but in the same respect as well, it was your dad that introduced you to technology and coding, which led you to early experiments with animation. How did that mix of kind of art and technology kind of shape you into then becoming an editor? Because I feel like that's the perfect combination of both.
I mean, well, that's right. And that is exactly what you're completely right. And it's kind of interesting, really, because how I got into filmmaking was I wanted to be an artist, really. I wanted to be a painter. And so I went to art school to do painting, and I got kicked out the first time when I was 18 for smoking too much dope and not going to class enough. And then I drew a comic book in Wellington for a couple of years, was part of an anthology of artists who drew a comic book in Wellington. And then I went back to art school, and I had the sort of glorious plan of getting a degree and then becoming a high school art teacher. But while I was at painting school the second time, I kind of had the realization that really I just wasn't good enough to be a painter. Like, if you're going to be an artist, you have to be, I think you have to be really good, and that's not necessarily a comment on technical ability. Actually, it's just more a comment on passion, I think. But when I was kind of walking across the quad, kind of disillusioned, I ran into a guy whose name's Brett Nichols, who I think now is teaching at a private film school in Wellington, and he was the film technology tutor, because he had actually been a DOP and was kind of having a sabbatical and teaching technology at the Waikato Polytech, as it used to be called in the day. And he said to me in this one conversation, he said, "Why don't you come back and do film next year?" And I was like, "Really?" And he was like, "Yeah, well, you seem to like the elective and you're quite good at it. Why don't you just come back and do that?" And I was like, "Oh, yeah, okay." And, literally kind of the rest is history. It's interesting how one person can actually really change your life, I guess. And for me, that was really him. Like, I just kind of saw that you could do all this cool, because he used to do cool stuff. Like, he would go to Auckland and shoot music videos, and take students along to crew. So, you would traipse up to the power station and be shooting Garageland music video on 16 mil, and did that sort of stuff plenty of times. And it was kind of fun and exciting. And as you say, it was a mixture of art and technology, both things which I kind of had a reasonable handle on, and they just kind of combined. And I take it you've probably read my How I Got Started in the Industry article on the DN's website if you're this in the weeds on the story. I think the third big combining factor for me was really music. Like, I've always loved music. I played music really badly. I grew up in a household where music was really important. Like, the stereo was going all the time. I've inflicted the same punishment on my own children. And I think that it's kind of art plus technology plus rhythm are it's kind of the key to the moving image, really.
Did it change your definition of an artist? And I think one thing I'd like to touch on as well, Francis, because I probably don't speak about it enough or mention it before I jump and have a chat with people, is the fact that I was a musician as well. And I'm going to take a stab that you were a drummer. Is that correct?
No, I rhythm guitar and then bass. But rhythm section is definitely the thing, yeah.
Okay, so you managed to pull in from both ends, the melody and the rhythm. If you're a good bass guitarist, then you're definitely pulling that. And I love the mention of Garageland as well. Nice wee Flying Nun reference. And I'm curious, what do you think has probably been the most torturous band you've pushed on to your children? I think when I have kids, I know they're probably going to have to put up with either Bolter Space or the Gordons at some point.
Oh, great choices. It's really funny because when you have kids, basically they think all of your music is terrible, no matter what it is, until they get to about 17 or 18, and then they tell you to your face that your music is terrible, but you catch them listening it on the side. You catch them listening to it in secret, and then we inflicted bands like the Kills and stuff like that on our kids, and one of my kids was on social media about a month ago posting lyrics to the Kills to describe how he was doing the university project. So yeah, you leave an indelible mark. I guess in the same way that I grew up kind of stealing my father's Santana and Led Zeppelin albums,
And it's interesting because I think that's often the kind of place that a lot of people start to kind of learn about their influences, artistic, whether it be, as you said, you started in painting but shifted to film, but that can also transcend into that, as you said, because Brett was making music videos. Was there any early interest for yourself to get straight into just music videos alone, or was it kind of something that developed a little bit later on that you're like, oh, there's potential that I could do this area as well?
Oh, no, music videos was definitely like a hook. It was definitely a hook. I mean, a good music video is basically a short film with an awesome soundtrack, right? I mean, and that's kind of, and they're really fun. It's really exciting, and yeah, I haven't done one in a long time now, but they definitely, I mean, they're a really great place to start to learn how to edit as well. People are always making low budget music videos, so it's a great place to kind of jump in and learn the craft and kind of come up that way. And I think for me, that's definitely where I kind of learned to edit. I definitely learned not to cut on the beat, but to cut on the melody instead. That was where I kind of learned that from doing music videos.
The thing I've always loved about music videos and the composition of music videos is it's a self-contained idea that needs to achieve something within the space of 3 to 4 minutes, or alternatively be maybe shocking or daring in a sense that like it stays with you through incredible editing, lighting and camera work. And one for me that is always going to stand out, I think it's only ever been played on New Zealand television maybe 4 or 5 times, is got to be AFCO by Skeptics. Is there any music video that you can remember from that earlier period that you're like, this has stuck with me and makes me want to make a music video?
Oh man, it's kind of all the music videos that kind of always stick in my head are essentially a bunch of kind of which would be vaguely unknown Hamilton bands, because I went to film school in Hamilton and we worked on these music videos, and because you watch them 400,000 times when you're making them, they really stick in your head. If you're asking about sort of iconic New Zealand music videos I mean, I don't know. Look, there's so many great music videos out there. Um, so many great stylistic ones. I mean, the Queens of the Stone Age Go with the Flow was a really exciting music video at one point in time for me with the black, white, and red rotoscoping. Um, yeah, they're all kind of more modern ones. Chris Knox's endless homemade videos. But
Mm.
like I say, the ones that whenever we talk about music videos, I think about ones that, I crewed that Greg Page would be doing in Hamilton with the endless Hamilton bands that, like, you like Romantic Andes that nobody would remember anymore. Those are the ones that stick in my head because they were such exciting production experiences, really.
And is it that sense of investment as well? Because of the fact you were in the project, it sticks in your mind more because there's that emotional connection as well to those
Oh,
projects.
yeah, yeah, 100%. 100%.
And your journey is interesting to me, Francis, because after film school, you managed to somehow hustle your way into TVNZ as a tape operator, even blasting the head of operations phone just to get notice. Do you
Yeah.
mind me asking, how many times did you call their phone in order to get that first sit-in day as a tape operator? And did that kind of teach you that persistence is sometimes just the main part of the equation that you need in order to get that kind of like foot in the door?
Persistence is 100% the only way I think you're going to get in the door. Like if you're a young person, you've just left film school, there's probably, I mean, I don't know how many people are graduating film school now, but it must be in the hundreds, right? And it's kind of quite thankless when you leave film school and you go out into the crewing world because you think, hey, I've done this course, I've learned all these skills. In my case, I could load a 35mm camera, I could use Avid, which was a bit more paid back in the day, but it still was, the industry cutting standard. And nobody was going to turn around and give you a job as a DOP or an editor because, you just out of film school. And so people going down the running route or whatever, or in my case, I went the tape op route. And the only way to get those jobs to stand out from the competition around you, because there was a lot of competition then, and I'm sure there's more competition now. It really is just to pester the living shit out of people. It's to ring and ring and ring and go, I'm keen, I'll help, I'll turn up, I'll do anything, I'll make coffee, I'll sweep the floor, to kind of realize that you are a novice and you're starting out from scratch and you just make yourself available. There's a fine line between being annoying and being keen, you know. I think for me, with poor old long suffering Paul Hedges, who was head of operations at TVNZ at the time, I think it was a weekly call. But, to be fair to Paul, it's not like I rang him up and he went, no. I rang him up and he went, oh, there might be some tape op jobs coming. Why don't you call me back? And so I just call him back every week. And I think after 5 or 6 weeks, he said, yep, come on in.
Yeah, I love that because it's almost like a feeling of he's like, shit, this guy's really not going to give up. So I'm going to have to
Yeah,
see, I'm going to have to just
yeah,
commit to it and find somewhere for him to go.
yeah, yeah. Well, like, and I got to like be perfectly honest with you. It's as now that I'm an old guy myself, when I talk to young people, because I talk to, young people quite a lot who want to know about it, or I feel like somebody's just starting out or whatever, I will often, um, like if I think the person's kind of maybe got a bit of what it takes, or they seem like they're a good person and to work with, you quite often you throw those people kind of like, I don't want to say you throw them a bone, but you kind of throw them almost the scent of a bone. And the first test is actually how people pick up and run with it. And it's kind of it's the first kind of hurdle that people really, I think, have to get over, is that sort of keenness factor, because you pretty quickly see the people who are just like, oh yeah, I'll do that if you give me an opportunity, rather than the people who are really hungry for it. And you have to be really hungry for it. Like one of my kids is studying film at Massey in Wellington, and my big advice to him, and I've been being very hands off because he has to figure it out for himself, is my big advice to him, and it would probably be good advice for everybody who wants to get into it, is you just have to want it more than the next guy
Mm.
or the next person, because there are so many talented people and there are so many people who have great ideas for films or have scripts or whatever. But if you want to stand out from that from that crowd, you just have to be prepared to basically it, work harder, but that doesn't mean longer hours necessarily. It just means you just have to be committed to the idea of doing it and just kind of make it your focus, really.
Do you feel like there's almost like a mistake that's often made in people's minds where it's like they need to have ultimately all the technical knowledge that they can possess rather than really not just focusing on the core skill, which is just determination and actually just turning up, actually like showing face and actually being there? Because, yeah, I imagine technical skill needs to be there, needs to be the kind of foundation. But in the same respect, would you say it's almost more important that you're kind of showing the confidence that you will turn up, you will be there, and that like you really do want this?
100% it is, because the thing is that you probably don't know the technical, no matter how good you are with technology, you probably don't know the core technical skills that you need for, like, if I talk about post-production, right? It's very, I don't think anybody gets taught any of the boring, fundamentally important stuff at film school, and they definitely won't be teaching themselves the boring, fundamental stuff at home on their computer. And I'm talking about time codes and EDLs and like all the
Yeah.
technical, jargony stuff. But people will teach you that on the job. And the thing which I've always found, and that I've done myself with people, is to be really, well, not everybody is, but most people are very generous with that knowledge and very patient with teaching you that knowledge. So you don't know stuff and people will teach you stuff. So you will get taught those things. So the last thing you kind of really actually want to be is turning up going, oh, I know how to do all the things, because the person you're talking to will be going, well, you don't really. But if you turn up and you go, look, I'm keen to learn, I'm keen to work, I'm really into it, I'm passionate about it, I love it, it's great, it's just what I want to do. Then if you're the person hearing that attitude, you go, oh yeah, cool, that's cool, that's cool. Let me help this person. And yeah, my experience has been over a long time of doing it now that almost everybody, including the grumpy old farts, have been really supportive and really generous with their time and their knowledge. So turn up and ask for it, really.
I definitely can attest to that, mate. I did running in an audio suite, and at first I was absolutely terrified of even asking anyone for any sort of pointers, advice, or anything else like that. And then after a while of thinking these guys were angry, didn't want to deal with me, as soon as I even asked the first question of being like, hey, can you show me how you did that? It instantly changed the behavior, it instantly changed their kind of the way they interacted with me, because much like what you said, if you're willing to kind of put yourself forward and at least be open to hearing other opinions or other ways of doing things, everyone's going to kind of knock at your door and be like, yeah, cool, like we want to help out. I love how you mentioned that. And your first big break came with Tumeke, which later became Pūkana, massive show from a children's television perspective. You wore many hats. You were cutting, animating, you even created some skits, you did some claymation. Francis, like, was there a little bit of that kind of like proving yourself sort of element coming out from that role and being like, I feel like I can do a lot of things, but I feel like I need to show people I can do a lot of things? Or was it kind of like you were kind of finding your own little niche or area that you wanted to jump into?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. It's like kids TV is a really, really great place to work. They're really sort of generous with the amount of scope you can have, and nobody has any money. So if you have creative ways of doing things that look cool and fun, then people are normally into it. With that particular role, it was, that was an opportunity came up to edit a show, and I was opping tapes at TVNZ at the time, and I said, well, I can do it because I knew how to use Avid, I knew how to edit from film school, basically. And so I just kind of threw myself in, and it was a chance to really learn how to edit. That was why I kind of took it on. But I guess it was just everything there kind of meshed in with all those things that I'd talked about that I'd been interested in when I was a kid myself, um, animation, illustration, music video. You talk about music video. We used to do a music video every week on those shows. Every week we do a music video. And it was cool. I don't think I really ever had an idea in my head like I wanted to show people what I could do. It was just fun to do it. And I mean, sometimes it wasn't fun to do it. And like a notable example of that was one time one time on one show, we were a minute short of duration, and I said, "Oh, I reckon I could." I had never done 2D animation before using what we had to hand, which was just the Avid, and I said, "I reckon I could probably do something to fill that 1 minute up." And so I made a 1 minute South Park parody animation,
Oh
and it
my
was
god.
so difficult to do because I had to basically make up still images in Photoshop and then import them into the Avid and cut between them. So I had to make all these stills to make, South Park's pretty basic and it's be a long-winded explanation. But it got to about 2 o'clock in the morning and it had to go to sound mix the next day at lunchtime. It got to 2 o'clock in the morning and I was felt so overwhelmed that I almost cried.
Oh my
Like I sat
god.
there, well, it wasn't like tears of grief or anything. It was tears of like, oh my God, like it was just, I'd been awake for a huge number of hours and it was really challenging. I just felt like this kind of like little sting in my eyes. And I just sort of went, you've got to do it and do it. And so I just did it. And I think I probably had to pull an all-nighter to do it. And yeah, it was that was when I think back on that, that was kind of like, it wasn't like everybody went, wow, amazing, because people didn't really appreciate the effort that was involved. They went, oh, cool. So for that sort of stuff, you just do it for yourself, really. So it's cool that people watch it, but also when you're doing a weekly show, it's kind of like, cool, great, next.
In a way, does it kind of feel like you're it's kind of this whole idea of like it lived in that moment and now it's gone, as in
Yeah.
like you'll get to savor that moment of seeing it go out, but like yeah, it's going to be gone the next week and no one else is probably maybe they'll remember it, maybe it'll be like a memorable part of that show, but in a year's time that's it. And in a way, was it kind of like a live performance? It was almost like a theater. You get to have that one moment and then after that it's gone. Was
Yeah, I
it
mean,
kind of a strange thought for you, like being like, yeah, this might only get seen one time?
well, I mean, to be honest with you, that's kind of how the whole, that's kind of how the whole process works, right? Like people are still, whenever you talk to people, they go, oh, you're making a thing, and you go, yeah. And they go, how long is that taking you? And you go, oh, I've been doing that for a month, to make, and that's even just talking about doing like a 1 hour, like a, commercial hour TV show,
Mm.
commercial hour TV show, 4 to 5 weeks of editing. People go, 4 to 5 weeks of editing? And you go, yeah. And they go, but it's like only 40 minutes long. And you go, well, yeah, it takes a long time to get it right. And because, people, as you say, people live in the moment of experiencing it like it is a live thing. And it just kind of washes over people to some extent, all the minutiae of detail that you and everybody else who's working on it are putting into it kind of washes over people and becomes this experience. But that's also kind of how it should be, I think. I think if everybody was noticing how intricate everything was, it would be overwhelming and probably not that good of work.
And I'm curious for you, Francis, what kind of clicked during that period of time? Because those first proper roles are usually the roles that kind of make or break anyone. And much like what you said, you were pulling sometimes all-nighters to fill this one little minute of footage, but it was an important part of your journey. What was it for you that clicked that you're like, shit, I'm here, I'm in the trenches, I'm doing this thing? Like, was there any particular moment where you're like, I am an editor, I'm an editor now?
Much later, really. Like, I think there's a difference between liking editing, working as an editor, and being or feeling. I don't want to talk for other people, but for my personal experiences, is that feeling like I am an editor has taken quite a long time, and that's not because of varied interest or being pulled in different directions. It's actually more about a feeling of being good at it. Like I kind of jokingly say to people, and it's only half jokingly, that I feel like I'm starting to get the hang of it now. So, I first started editing in 1994 at film school. That was my first times editing. And 30 years later, I'm like, oh, yeah, I feel like I'm starting to really get a handle on it now. I would definitely call myself an editor now. Before I would probably like, at the time when I finished working at Pūkana, I'd been editing seriously full time for 5 years, I was like, I edit, but I didn't know if I felt like I was an editor. It's really hard to explain to you. It's kind of like there's like I don't know. It's about a feeling of mastery, I guess. Now it feels like I can see all the angles. I can see the corners, whereas I couldn't back then. I could see how to put shots together, and I could see how to tell stories, and I could see how music kind of worked and it went together. But now I've got a much better grasp on big picture, and I think big picture is really what makes you an editor.
Kind of like being a painter, you establish yourself, you find out what your style is, and it's about honing that craft as a whole project rather than just getting the individual elements correct. I love that, Francis, and it's a really good way of explaining it. It's much like people when they start bands, they don't consider themselves musicians until they're at a certain level. It's kind of like that title that they feel like they need to, yeah, as you said, award themselves once they've got to a certain level. And I find that really interesting. That's kind of something that's always been in the back of your mind. And interestingly enough, you then switched into setting up your own editing suite in Auckland. How did it feel kind of stepping out from the kind of the safety net of Pūkana to then having your own editing suite, becoming your own boss in a sense, and then finding projects to work on? Was that quite like a big step for you, or did you feel like it just naturally kind of happened anyway?
Yeah, there was a couple of years between working for Simcoe, who made Pūkana, and setting up my own place. What that really was about was that I went into cutting a lot of commercials after I worked at Simcoe, and the thing was is that you would put in your invoice after every job, and you would know that the edit suite was getting paid more money than you were. So, and like 40 to 50% more money than you were. And you would get kind of frustrated by the gear, and you would sit in these chairs like as I was saying to you before, I'm not small. I'm 6'4". I'm huge, and ergonomically, it was really uncomfortable quite often. I was just like, man, I'm over this. I'm sick and tired of being paid less money than a computer does. So I'm just going to buy a computer, and so I bought a computer. And I mean, it was no small thing. Avid, which everybody cut on Avid, and everybody pretty much still cuts on Avid now. And the time that I went freelance, an Avid system was going to cost you $60,000 or $70,000, and then you really had to have tape decks and stuff on top of that. But about the time that I thought about doing it is when Apple came out with Final Cut Pro, which kind of revolutionized everything, because you paid $1,000 and suddenly you had this piece of software, and it was good enough. And you could then buy this cheaper sort of hardware that would cost you, 10 grand to stick in your computer to make it run. And suddenly you have a viable edit suite for 20, 30K instead of 60, 70, 80, 90, 100K. And it meant that you could be the one charging money. And so suddenly you can make a lot more money. So that was the drive behind doing it. In some ways, I don't know if it was the greatest career choice in the world to have done that, but I had a lot of fun working that way.
And it meant you got to be your own boss as well. And in that respect, it must have been interesting because during that time you would have been meeting other peers who maybe had their own edit suites as well. And you once mentioned that you compared learning from your peers is the same as a musician, how they might pick up riffs or pick up beats or something else of the sort, taking what you like and building on it. What's something that you've borrowed or learnt from another editor that still sticks with you? Is there, you mentioned not cutting to the rhythm, cutting to the melody. Is there another sort of like little trick of the trade that you remember picking up quite early on?
Look, everything, I think every job you do, every conversation you have with people, every online session you sit in, every conversation I have with another editor, if you talk about editing, something will always go, oh, I mean, I learned a lot more non-editing things from other people that I worked with than editing things. So I learned how to use After Effects and things like that from people. In terms of actual editing things, yeah, it's a good question. It's hard to put my finger on because editing's kind of interesting as it's kind of a solitary craft in a lot of ways. Like you work with a director, you work with camera people, you work with online artists, but you kind of figure it out for yourself. So it's only when you normally kind of catch up with people for a beer that you talk about that sort of stuff. It's pretty unusual to work in a room where you're connected to other rooms, to people working on the same shows. But yeah, good question. I think probably one of the most definite things I can tell you in terms of inspiration from other editors is actually, and if anybody is an editor, they should definitely read this book, is get yourself a copy of Walter Murch's book, In the Blink of an Eye. Walter Murch lays out 5 rules for making an edit, and they're all pretty good rules. Like all good rules, you break those rules when you need to, but they're pretty good rules. I'm just trying to think what else I could tell you. Oh, actually, there is one really clear little thing that I could tell you that I picked up from another editor, and I can't remember who it was, but they taught me the rule of 3, and that's that in any type of thing where you have a cutaway or a montage or whatever, 3 shots is always better than 2 or 4 for some reason.
Is it like pleasing to the eye, you feel?
Yeah.
It's a rhythmic thing,
feels better.
much like every pop song is written in 4/4. Do you feel like it's a little bit of that?
I think it probably is a
familiarity?
4/4. I think it's probably actually a 4/4 timing thing because it's 3 fill bits, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, good point. That's crazy. I
Yeah.
never would have thought of it in that way, that you need to think about a rhythm and vision, not only a
Well,
rhythm and audio.
you've just taught me something new, Jamie, because I'd be talking about gleaning things from other people because I'd never actually thought about why it was better. I was just like, it just feels better. Why is it better? So there you go. You've just taught me that it's probably because it's 3 fill beats.
Oh, look at that. Look at that. And going into the latter part of, well, the middle, I would say the middle part of your career, Francis, you've worked across many genres, and it's kind of almost sad timing in a way. We're probably going to be releasing this episode a little bit later on, but at the time that we've recorded this, you worked on a couple of projects from Beyond the Darklands, Birdland, God Defend New Zealand, quite a few Nigel Lasher projects, who Nigel recently passed away. But what drew you to working on documentaries more than anything else? Because I felt like you had a very big period of mostly working on doco projects.
Yeah, I mean, I would say probably more we'll refer to that these days more as factual than doco. Like I started
Yeah.
off cutting docos, but factual. The drama was quite hard. It's quite hard to get into, I think. And I kind of drifted into factual TV, and I had a young family, and it paid the bills, and it did its thing. I mean, I preferred drama to doco. Like if you talk about what I watch, like if you're sitting down at home, I'll very rarely ever watch documentary. I like drama. So yeah, it was just the kind of direction that I went into, and obviously there's a lot of work out there for that, and I don't really know how anybody would go about. I mean, obviously the traditional drama editing route is you become an assistant editor and you go through that rank, and I've kind of come at drama sort of more sideways via documentary. It's a good question. It's interesting you bring up Nigel because I worked with Nigel for a very, very long time, like 10 years across a whole lot of things. And he was a really great guy. And it's really sad that he's passed away at such a tragically young age. But he was really, he was interested in all things. I said on LinkedIn, he was interested in all things science and all things fun, and he had been involved in working with people who had been through horrific circumstances, and it wasn't that he had no empathy for those people. It was just that he had somehow been able to transcend it because he was just such an optimistic, funny, exuberant guy, and he really brought that to the TV screen successfully, which is why he was on air for so long. He was fun to work with.
You can kind of get that vibe from just watching his programming, and I still find it really strange because I do remember when, in particular, as you said, the factual TV show Beyond the Darklands came out. to me, it seemed like the polar opposite of what Nigel was. It seemed odd, like this very kind of jovial, nice-looking guy talking about horrific things that had been happening in New Zealand, crime or whichever. Was it kind of like that for you, meeting Nigel during that process and being like, this is a bit odd? Like,
I actually worked with Nigel for the very first thing he did on TV, which was actually Screen Time had done these 3 sort of crime specials, and he consulted on them before they did Beyond the Darklands, and I met him then. He was just a funny kind of guy, but he was a really yeah, I know he was a really caring guy. So I could guess the best story that I would ever have to tell about Nigel would be that when we were doing that series of Beyond the Darklands, those were some horrendous crimes were being talked about. And what people don't warn you about, I think, when you're going to work on a show like that, is you're going to be seeing crime scene photographs. You're going to be hearing a lot of interview that is too graphic to make it into a television program. And you're going to be hearing that for 8 to 10 hours a day, 40 hours a week, and it's grueling. And it took its toll on everybody who worked on that show, I think. But the only person who ever asked if I was all right during the time of doing that was Nigel. Nigel would sometimes, and he did it throughout the time we worked together, sometimes he'd just pop in. He'd pop in to say hello, into the edit suite. He'd come on, hey, how you doing? Make some jokes, talk some stuff. But he actually said to me one day, he said, "Are you all right? Is it affecting you?" And I think that sense of humour that he had, that sense of comedy that he had, was how he was able to transcend all of that awful stuff. So even though I understand what you're saying, it's this weird juxtaposition, I guess it was complimentary. That was how he'd survived that stuff. I mean, I only did one series of that show because I was just like, whoa, it's too much. It's too much for me. I want to do something else. I want to do something more entertaining.
I did wonder that, Francis, because I've always thought about, and I say this from watching recently, the show that everyone, I guess, is talking about at this current point, which is that and Monster, the Ed Gein story, and I keep on thinking about who are the people that are creating this, and how does this not affect them in any way by making this type of content? Like, it must be pretty harrowing. Were there ever any points that you kind of had to take a bit of a moment, like a lever, and like go have a break, purely because you're like having to sit there and listen to this content quite a lot? Or no, you kind of you got into the swing of it, and you're like, okay, that's the day done, cool, let's go.
How it affects you is actually, well, how I found it affected me. And I think if you're ever working on material like this, you have to be really conscious of how your brain is reacting to stuff. How it affected me was I actually didn't find myself upset or off-put by anything that I was seeing or hearing. What I found is, and which I discussed with Nigel at the time, who said it's quite a normal thing, is that my emotional responses to everything else in life became quite heightened. So that was including like finding things funny. Like, it was not just the bad emotions, it was the joyful emotions as well. It was like, but I found myself on this little bit of an emotional roller coaster. And he said to me, that's a pretty standard response to trauma, is that sort of thing would happen. But no, it's a good point, that question you make. I don't know how people do it. The only thing I can say is I feel like there's definitely a difference between drama and documentary in that world. I think your brain really knows when you're doing drama that it's not real.
Yeah,
so there's quite a big
and
difference.
you're able to separate it. You're able to put it in different compartments and understand that. Yeah,
it's make believe, it's not real.
You touched on one thing, which you said, there's a very big difference between factual and doco. And speaking of that, we should probably talk about one of what I would consider the first big docos in terms of your career, which is Poi'E, which you made in 2016. You mentioned that after the first screening, you and the director felt it could be better. And I find like this is a very common thing among editors or anyone in any creative industry, is that constant sense of it could be better. Do you think that's kind of like something that every editor has to live with? They kind of have to look at the project and be like, oh, I know there's always going to be something I wish I could have changed, and then just accepting it?
Did I say that about Poi'E, that it could be better after the screening? It wasn't after our first screening of it, because
that was your first screening.
Yeah, because basically I came in I came into that project as a I don't even know if I was the second, I might have been third or fourth editor. And we watched it and we were like, it's great, but it could be better. But that is the yeah, it's interesting why you were saying that. I was thinking about, I think one of the big differences between being an editor and somebody who edits is there definitely is a thing where early on in your career you don't take criticism very well. It's hard to take
Mm.
criticism, it's so personal. And that includes criticism from yourself. But one of the great marks of maturity is when you can hear from other people that things could be better, but when you can actually look at stuff yourself and say, no, 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 that needs to be better. And sometimes that means taking the ideas that you've spent a lot of time crafting and just ripping them down and starting again, and sometimes again and again and again and again and again. I mean, yeah, when I don't know if you've watched No Iron Threesome, but there's a scene in that film which I recut 36 times, and that was 36 times that I recut the scene, and I think more than 10 times I started from scratch. I just went right back to the drawing board and started from scratch. And the really interesting thing about the scene is, I wound up using some outtake material to make the scene work.
And that was basing it off, as you said, you had the original template, the original kind of idea that you had in mind. And so did you have to have like a sit down wait period for yourself to kind of like go back to the project and be like, okay, now I can come in with like a new headspace of how I want this to look, but also I need to have everything like laid out in front of me and think about how am I going to piece this together? How did that come about? Because you say 30 times, was that all in one run, or was it kind of like, I'm going to leave this for a
No,
week, this little
no.
piece? Yeah.
Oh, yeah, no, yeah, we definitely would do that. Like you move on from scenes, but you're just kind of living within the whole film all the
Mm.
time. I think most of that period I was just chipped away at it day after day after day after day after day. But but you just go. It's pretty tempting on some jobs, and like I don't, when you mow the lawns or you cut the hedge, you go, oh, I could do a better job than that, but it's good enough. Um, it's quite often it's tempting to do it with editing, particularly if you've got a deadline as well. But you just have to really, when you kind of get to a certain level, and that level for me was definitely theatrical. When you get to that level, you just have to go, no, something is annoying me. Something, and you just have to listen to that nagging doubt constantly in your head and just keep battling away at it. And it's soul destroying. And yeah, distance is quite often really good for that. Like you come back after a couple of weeks and go, what the hell was I thinking there? Why did I do that? We just had that on the film we're doing now. It was sat with a scene being a certain way for probably 6 or 7 weeks. And then we watched it and went, what the hell was that about? Changed it.
Having done work in podcasting for a little bit and radio as well, I feel like having that distance and being able to distance yourself is like a really massive step that you have to be able to take. And I love that you kind of have the forethought to think about it in that way. And another documentary that you later worked on was the Herbs Song of Freedom. I feel like Poi'E and Songs of Freedom kind of almost go together hand in hand. Being one very much following a similar sort of storyline of like redemption, among other things, and both being very huge parts of like the musical zeitgeist of New Zealand. And you ended up working with the same director, which is Te Arepa Kahi. And do you feel like, in a way, the reason that you ended up working on Poi'E and then Songs of Freedom not long after was that the fact that you guys had this like relationship of understanding and kind of knowing where both were?
Shut is an awesome guy. Like I've known him actually. It's quite funny because I've known him since he was 19 years old and I was 25 years old. I met him when I was working on Tumeke in 1999, and it was like when you know somebody that long, you know somebody such a long time, you don't have to you don't kind of have to mince words, and you learn. And it's an important thing when you're an editor is you learn a director's sensibilities and kind of what they like, and then you kind of try and mesh with that, but also you try and mess with that as well, which is quite often. That sounds like probably not what most people would think of, but you kind of have to challenge people's. Part of being an editor is definitely challenging people's sensibilities, understanding they always have the final say, but go, okay, you thought that, but what about this? Um, Tarapa is an extraordinarily smart guy, and those two films, like you pointed out, be complementary. yeah, they're definitely seen as being in partnership with each other, those two films.
And I like the mention of like challenging each other. It kind of almost
Oh
feels
yeah.
like the tradition of any relationship. It doesn't make sense if you're not critical in a sense. Well, not even critical is probably not the right word, but if you're not willing to kind of question some decisions or some sort of dialogue, it doesn't make any sense. Because if you're just constantly agreeing with each other, there isn't going to be any sort of, I guess, progress in a way.
Yeah, no, 100%. And Tarifa has a great line. I'm not sure if it was his line, but he always talks about interrogating the material. That's his
Mm.
process to it. Like, you just keep interrogating, which means basically you just keep reworking it. And he's a really interesting director to work with because he's not the guy that sits in a room and goes, "Oh, I thought about this." He's the guy that goes into the edit suite and starts recutting stuff. And so you come in and you go, "Okay, what the hell's happened here?" And then you go, "Right, okay, oh yeah, yeah, I see what he's done there, but I think I can do better than that." And then you attack it and you change it. And so it's a really interesting process. Like some people have said to me, "Doesn't that drive you crazy?" And I'm like, "No, I think it's great. Like I don't have to wonder what he's thinking." And also, he doesn't care if well, it's not that he doesn't care. It's that he gives me license to rework what he does. So you keep interrogating that material, you keep challenging each other to do better, and the work just keeps going up. And Poi'E was like you mentioned, Poi'E. Poi'E was a great experience for us. You know, that was a great film. It wasn't his first film, but it was my first serious feature film, and the groundwork had been laid, and it was awesome. But it, it was it was a really fantastic collaboration between the two of us to take it to where that film ultimately wound up, which was a really great price. And it's one of the pieces of work I'm most proud of in my whole career.
And I can understand why, because it's the crazy thing is if you tell the story to anyone outside of New Zealand and try to explain it at base level, people will be like, oh, okay, well, that's cool. But the way that there was just this really awesome narrative behind it, because before speaking with you, Francis, I was explaining Poi'E, the documentary, to friends of mine here based in Argentina, and they're like, oh, okay, well, that's great, but like, I don't really get what's the appeal of it, and it's the humanity. The documentary brings out and pulls out this really beautiful story that kind of really builds it into like the tale that it is, because it is a tale, and it's really incredible that you guys managed to kind of put the stamp on that time. I think it's a good time for me to transition to your next kind of part, which is because you talked about how you came at feature films from like an adjacent end, and that
Yes.
feature, one of the first ones you worked on was This Town, which came out in 2020, which I love because of one of the facts being that you're one of the main actresses in that is Alice May Connolly, who I actually used to gig with. She used to play in a really good surf
Oh,
rock
cool.
band called PR Rescue. But aside from that point, her being a great drummer, was the fact that it's a bit different approaching a feature film compared to a documentary. Was there a massive learning curve for you, or did you feel like it kind of naturally kind of shifted for you to be able to move into feature film editing?
So you mean by drama by that? You mean
Yeah, drama to
yeah, yeah,
doco,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, 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 yeah. Well, I mean, I'd been I mean, obviously, I had cut short films. I had made short films. I had always been interested in drama. I knew the conventions of drama. There's definitely a different way of approaching drama in terms of like um, doco's about finding a story within scenes. Drama's kind of about how to convey that story within a scene. You know, so you're looking at nuances, performance, and timing, etc. You're not having to search for a story. So it is a bit different from that respect. But by the same token, it's I don't know. It's all editing. You know, like I I kind of always look for realism in drama and look for drama in documentary. So that it's very complementary. And it was I did a masterclass just after I'd done Poi'E. The guild put on a masterclass with Danny, Australian film editor. Oh man, what's her last name? I can't remember their last name. It'll come to me probably later. I'm having a geriatric moment at the moment. But, she kind of was talking to me about editing films, and she's edited a lot of films. And she was like, well, what do you edit? And I said, well, I've only really edited documentary. And she said, if you can edit documentary, you can 100% edit drama. It's all the same thing. And one of my great friends and the person who's given me a lot of advice over the last sort of 10, 15 years is Annie Collins, who's just a fantastic editor. And Annie says, the same thing, really. You can, if they're so complementary, they go hand. It's all storytelling, really. I guess if I was to be critically self-aware, I would say that I'm not as comfortable with drama as I am with doco yet. Um, I find that there's an ease of familiarity with documentary that will come with drama, but it's not quite there yet. It's different, So I've cut a lot of documentary over the years. It I don't think about decisions as consciously, I guess, as I do with drama.
Is there an element of just needing to trust your gut in terms of editing and just kind of feeling like you have the faith and the confidence to do it? You mentioned that you still are a little bit hesitant on like the feature film side of things and feeling like you've got it, but you're kind of worrying about that whole aspect. But do you think there is like an element of just having that just straight instinct and just believing in what you're doing? Or do you think that there always needs to be a sort of small element of like being able to step back and reevaluate whenever you're making cuts?
Well, it's like playing music, right? It's like, when you can just jam freely, that's what editing should definitely be like. But sometimes I'm thinking about when I'm doing drama, and in fact when I'm doing doco sometimes too, I'm definitely thinking about what note comes next in the arrangement. Um, it's it's a it's a these elements of thinking and these elements of feeling in all the work that you do. You definitely have to have times where you're thinking really about the structure of a story, and then you have to kind of put your analytical brain on. But when you're actually making the cuts, you have to kind of in some way switch your brain off and just see how it feels, because it's a feeling medium. Like music, it's all about the feels, really. How does that feel to you emotionally? And I mentioned Walter Murch's sort of 5 rules of making an edit earlier on in this discussion, and one of the things that his number one rule, if I recall, is what's the emotional reason you're making that cut for?
And from that, is there any particular project that you can look back on and think that that's a perfect example of an emotional cut, a cut that you went in with the intention of to cause or bring about this sort of emotion?
Um, I think that I'm trying to make people feel something every time I do anything. And I got to say, I really hate the cheap. I really hate the cheap emotional shit. Like, so, sometimes you work with people in TV land who are like, oh man, I want to show people cry on camera. And I got an argument with somebody one time. And I said, man, the idea is not to show somebody crying on camera. The idea is to make the person cry at home.
Mm.
And it doesn't matter what it is. Like, I mean, I don't know what you're like, but I've got this really weird thing, and actually it did happen after Darkland, I think, where I cry when I watch things that are done beautifully in a film now. Like, not emotional things, not like, oh, I'm being made to cry by that, but like I'll have times where I go like, that cut was amazing, and I can feel tears welling up in my eye at just how great somebody's skill level is at something. And that's kind of like moving people is, I don't know, like, you're a musician, that's what you want to do when you play a piece of music, is you want to touch people somehow. When you cut something, anything, you'd be cutting a Toyota ad, you want to make people feel something. So I think I keep that in my mind. Every single edit I make, I want to move somebody somehow, if it's to laughter or to tears. I don't want to make people, I'm not into saccharine and tear jerky shit, but I definitely want to make people feel, whether it's like a little something, like a little moment. And sometimes you just have the weirdest little moments when you're doing films where you feel a little, you succeed in creating a moment in a film where you go, oh man. I'm working on a film at the moment which I can't talk very much about, but I can tell you it's a World War II film, and we constructed the scene, and I managed to put a moment in it which isn't an outrightly emotional moment. it doesn't involve anybody doing anything emotionally. It actually involves some artillery pieces going off in the background of a shot. But the moment that they happen in the scene, with what's happening with everything around it, with all the other characters, with the action, with the what's at stake in the scene, you have this little. It's actually, it gives me at least this little emotional uplift when it happens. And yeah, that's, I don't know. That's always striving for those.
I can 100% just from you describing the kind of scenario, I can imagine what it's like. It's like it's bringing humor and into levity. It almost makes the moments more I don't know, can make you more grief stricken in a moment by having this like small window of like hope and happiness, and then it just brings it all down. It's not like, yeah, it's not purposeful tearjerker. It's kind of a moment where it's like it seems odd that it's placed there, but it works so well that it provides that kind of jumping in point as well. And actually, I feel like maybe this leans naturally into what you were talking about before, which is where you went back and cut 30 times a scene in No Eye and Threesome, which that in itself was quite a massive project. The big twist ending, I don't know if this is going to ruin it for anyone if they haven't seen it, but the
No.
main premise being that it's supposed to be a documentary, but in actuality it's a drama because of the fact that this all happened. And then the whole idea of it's crazy, the concept in its own right. Is that kind of where you're getting at, that like there is moments that can be changed simply by how the edit looks, but it can become cheesy if you're not kind of thinking about it in a way that's kind of a bit more, gracious, or not pushing as much on that moment.
Yeah, so Ollie and I had this meeting, and I told him a story from my personal experience, and it was that interface, that ability to be able to interface with where he was trying to come from with the story, is what got me the job, basically, because he knew that he could trust me to be emotionally honest. When you editing is all filmmaking is making hundreds and thousands of tiny little decisions. And if your head is in the right emotional headspace, then every decision that you make will be informed by that headspace. So you don't have to then try and force things or make things cheap, easy, low-hanging fruit decisions. You can make things complicated, complex, detailed decisions that talk to the truth of the matter, not a representation of the matter. And one of the things that, I kind of said with Ollie all the time when we were doing that film was we had to pull it back. We had to pull it back because people don't, in real life, respond hyper emotionally to things to show their emotions. They respond in real world ways to things. Like people don't just go, "I'm angry at you." They slam a door and say nothing. That's kind of real life. So that was a really grueling experience, not for me but for Ollie, and it was good to be able to support him through that.
And I think you're right. It's almost like pulling in explosive emotions is actually more so in what's not said or what's not like shown in terms of action. It's more, the silence, or maybe necessarily the awkwardness, or the staying in the one scene rather than moving forward to the next part. It's about that awkwardness of the silence, the gaps, and everything in between.
Yeah, the unsaid, the subtext.
Yeah. And I love that you kind of were supporting each other in that journey, because I find it interesting that by you having that shared story, it kind of almost showed respect to him in the way of like how you brought the film together, because maybe it would have felt less genuine if he had someone who didn't really have a shared experience. And I'm not saying it was a directly shared experience, I'm more meaning in the sense where like you both could kind of get on that same wavelength and understand where the story would come from that.
Yeah, totally. I mean, at the time, I think when we were doing that film was about the time that La La Land had come out. I'm sure you've seen La La Land. One of the funniest reviews I ever read about that film was where somebody in the Hollywood Reporter, I think it was, wrote a review going, "I don't understand why they didn't get together. I don't understand why they didn't get together." And it really made me laugh, because I was like, are you kidding me? Have you never had a relationship that's not is this reviewer never had a relationship that hasn't worked out for no good reason? It just didn't work out. Yeah. yeah, you have to be able to bring. I think in order to do things successfully, it doesn't really matter what it is. You have to be able to get your head into the headspace of whatever you're working on.
It's funny for me because I see all these projects that you've worked on, and then you jump into editing sports coverage. Like, Francis, it's such a polar shift, and you did work with the America's Cup where it's live tension, it's all real. How does that compare? Like, because it's a much more controlled chaos that you're working with, but there is still the same elements that you kind of need to take from the drama, for example, into the live sports scenario. How did you find working on that?
So that's a really funny story because people always go, "What, are you working on that?" And I'm like, "Yeah." So I've been friends for a long time, with Jodie Malloy, who's the writer. And her partner is Leon Sefton, who's the producer of the America's Cup international broadcast. And I've known Leon for almost as long as I've known Jodie. Like, I've known him for a long time. And we've done a couple of little things together over the years, but nothing much else. And when the Cup was on in Auckland, he rang me up and he said, I need somebody to come and lead the editing. Will you come and do it? And I said, nah. Like, I'm not a sports guy. I'm not a live guy. I don't think I'd be much good to you. So, no, I'm not the guy for you, Leon. And he went, oh, okay, cool, fair enough. Yeah, right. And then a week went by, and Leon rang me up, and he pitched it to me cold again, like we had never had a conversation about it. And I was like, I don't think I'm your guy, Leon, but I'll think about it. And he went, oh, okay. And he rang me up the next week, persistence, right? We've talked about this earlier, persistence. He rang me up the next week and he went, look, and he pitched it to me cold again, like we hadn't had the two conversations. And the third time I said, yeah, okay, all right, fine. Well, okay, yep, okay. Lockdown had been on. There wasn't a lot of work around. I was like, I could probably do some work. So I said, yeah, okay, I'll come along and I'll do it. And it was funny because on the last night when New Zealand won the Cup in Auckland, I went up to him and I said, you were just going to call me every week until I said yes, weren't you? And he said, yeah. I needed somebody desperately and I knew you could do it. And so I was just going to call you till you gave in. And I was like, oh, okay. But to answer your question about it, there's two things I like. Well, there's three things I like about working on the Cup. Well, probably actually more than three things, but I'll lay them out. Number one is there are two helicopters and there are two chase boats on every race day. Each of those helicopter and boats has a Cineflex on it, which is, the remote operated camera. So you are getting an embarrassment of shots. And they're the sort of shots that you would only get on a multi-million-dollar thing. So you have this incredible footage to work with. There is this tremendous amount of drama, obviously, and not just the drama on the water with those machines, but the drama amongst the people who sail on that stuff. And it's tempting to think that, it's a bunch of rich old white guys, which it is, bankrolling it, and that's what would be the prevailing sort of attitude about it. But when you listen to those guys talk about it, you got Jimmy Spittle, who's just retired as the Australian guy, who in an interview talked about being this sort of the poor kid as a kid who had a little yacht made out of plywood, and he would wheel it on a little trailer on the back of his bicycle down to go and race all the rich kids who had their fiberglass boats who would laugh at him, and he just went, fuck you guys, and would just beat everybody because he had this huge drive just to show these people. And that sort of drama is, that's great doco story type stuff right there. So I go, oh yeah, that's cool. And then the other thing that makes it really cool working on it is just that everybody else you're working with is at the height of their game. And they're not just people from New Zealand, they're people from all over the world. The guy that I work with, the closest, has got the two things I can tell you about him is, one, he's got a BAFTA nomination as a cameraman. And the other thing is he got frostbite on the lens of a camera shooting up Everest one time. So you're working with, it's like, it's fast turnaround, there's a lot at stake, but you can inject a hell of a lot of drama into it because the material is very dramatic. You can do some really slick-looking stuff because the shots are forget about it, they're amazing. And you work with these people who are driven, passionate, and really skilled. And, I don't think you can ask for much more than that in a job. But it is weird to work on. It is very strange to work on.
Has it almost changed your opinion on things as well, Francis? Because I very much came from being a nerdy music geek sort of person. From now in the later years of life, I've got this newfound appreciation. It probably helps that I live in Argentina as well, of things like football, among other things, and the journey and the drama that is involved with football, among other things. Do you feel like it's kind of softened you up in a sense to the idea of being like, oh, now I can understand why people follow sports so much because of this experience working in the America's Cup? Has it kind of given you a new view? Like you said, the drama that's involved with guys like Spittle, who started at a young age like that.
I mean, I think it's, again, I mean, for me, I just know that part of my process has always been drinking the Kool-Aid. You know, it's like I said to you before, it's always about being in that mindset. I think that I have way more of an appreciation for a sport that I was never interested in before, because it just felt like the proviso of a bunch of rich, really rich white guys. And I think that I learned more of an appreciation of it by actually getting to learn that, no, actually the people who are actually driving the boats are quite a lot more down to earth. But, the flip side of that whole scenario is I don't freak people out, but I brought a completely different aesthetic to it than the people who normally work on it do. And so people would be like, sometimes people would be like, what the hell? Like, I'd get people going, because the best thing actually about doing the broadcast is you make all these little doco stories, which are pretty standard. But the other thing is that you do the daily opener, which is based upon what happened the day before. So you kind of get in really early in the morning. You've got 2 or 3 hours to whack this thing out that kicks the broadcast off. And I think before I started doing them, they'd been way more kind of maybe a bit more standard. But I just went, we're going to use, and I did it with the aforementioned man with the BAFTA, whose name's Tim Butt. He's a tremendously talented producer and shooter. He would lay the foundational story work, and I would just download these bombastic classical tracks and choose these outrageous shots and just make this really driving, cranking opener every day. And people would just be, just create some excitement, and it's a lot of fun. And I think people were used to things being a bit more restrained or less operatic with the way that I would do them. But I was like, what the hell? It's a huge grand thing. Let's just go full in. Let's go all in.
You turned it into a Colosseum battle with Titans rather than, a very formal affair with champagne.
Well, people before that, it was always like, you probably watched a bit of sport, everything would be all quick cuts and techno sort of thing. And I like, no, let's make it slow cuts and really dramatic and really drive the tempo into these kind of like OTT. So I treat them like a film trailer rather than a sports kind of event. But people always like, it's a good day at the office is when the commentators walk out at the end of the thing and they're laughing about it to you. Then they come in and they go like, that was like, what the hell was that? And you go, yeah, job done,
I love the idea of that. I think it just adds another element to you, Francis, of that whole like kind of a bit of cheekiness as well. And speaking of that, I think it's kind of cheeky that you kind of went back full circle to the animation style of thing, because during lockdown you created your own animated series of social distancing. And what was it that brought you back to kind of going to that first love of like drawing and art?
I kind of like knew if I didn't have something to do during that lockdown, I was going to turn into an alcoholic. Well, I mean, like there was nothing to do, right? I mean, and I like working. I mean, my wife will sometimes go to me, "You need a hobby," and I go, "What do you mean?" I'm like making these animations and doing stuff. She goes, "Yeah, but that's like work for you," and I'm like, "No, it's not. Like work's like my hobby." So I needed something to do, and that was a pure. That was a really pure, because it was all me, and nobody was giving me notes. I mean, people would try and give me notes, and I'd be like, oh well, I don't agree, so I'm just going to do it. I'm going to do it, and it was just this kind of there was nothing else to do, and but it became this really sort of passionate thing, and I wound up probably working on it 12, 14 hours a day, every day. And it was just pure joy the whole time. And when I got to the end of, I only did 6 little episodes. But when I got to the end of it, I was like, oh man, I could just keep doing this forever. And it was really it was gratifying that it was very well received by my peers and other people. When people would email me about it and say that they'd seen it and it was really great. And that was gratifying, but that wasn't why I did it. I just did it because I just kind of wanted something to do. And also, it was an emotional time, and art is therapy. That's how that was a way, I guess, for me dealing with that whole lockdown situation as well. It was, and it was a good time.
And I think this is the thing that I love, is that there was that rediscovery of kind of passion for a lot of people during COVID. I know everyone kind of made the point of like, we shouldn't try to pressure ourselves to do things during these times. But in a way, I think it was almost like a reset for a lot of people who were kind of like, shit, why have I left this at the wayside for so long? It's nice to be able to pick this up again. Do you see this as being something that you're going to maybe dip into again at any point, Francis? Or is it kind of like you had that beautiful moment and you just want to keep it there?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's probably as much drive to diarise things as there were at that time. But after that, I was like, I went to, so I've got a friend who I've been working with for 20 odd years who's a writer, director. His name's Brian Chalice. And I said to him, man, I've been talking to you for years about us doing an animated pilot. You write a script and we do a pilot. I think the time is right. You should write something and I'll make it. And that was during the second lockdown, which was, a more grinding affair. I got really into the weeds of making a far more complicated animation, which I've made like 7 minutes of, which is a pilot for a script that he wrote. So we've got that sitting there trying to figure out what to do with it next. But it wasn't like the social distancing thing. The social distancing thing was like, I like to think that, I was so happy doing that, I like to think that when AI takes over all of our jobs and we're all living at home on a universal basic income, that what happened during lockdown is a great sign that people will actually find lots of fulfilling things to do with their days. And I definitely would, because I'd just do more of that.
That's so right. I think, you definitely hit the nail on the head. I think, people realize that there was more fulfillment that can be found in just working the day-to-day or whatever, even people that worked in creative roles. I think the thing that I really loved was seeing all of my friends that maybe worked in production and other things like that kind of really using almost the limitations to their advantage and being like, how can I make something still, even if I've only got the square footage of my backyard in a house. It was very cool. In that respect, you touched on something very interesting, and I feel like it's a subject that comes up in every interview, which is, of course, the overhanging fear that AI is going to take over. And funnily enough, a year or so back, I met a tech startup CEO who was making a AI-based editing tool, which to me, it seemed scary. I'm not sure about it. I know it's obviously AI assisted, but I think it comes back to the classic question that I feel, do you think AI is ever going to be able to pull the emotion or have the emotive effect that editing can only be achieved with an actual editor? Or do you think there is going to be a chance that maybe AI overlords will take over even on that front?
Look, I think it's a really interesting question, and I've actually been thinking about AI since I was a teenager. I always thought it was an interesting idea. You read about it in science fiction, and I read sciencey stuff about it at the time. There was this future forecasting about what might happen. And I got some very distinct opinions on it now. I've been reading lots of stuff over the years. My comments on it would be, I don't think that we've actually got, as creatives, as creators, we don't have anything to fear from AI. So I'm probably going to get in the weeds a bit here. I'll try and keep it as succinct as possible without getting too crazy. The long and the short of it comes down to what you consider a definition of intelligence. And the best definition that I've read, at least, of what constitutes genuine intelligence, not just problem solving, but actual intelligence, comes from Max Tegmark, who's a big mover and shaker in the AI world. And how he defines it is a subjective experience of reality. Now, an algorithm that can chop together shots based upon a neural network engine doesn't have a subjective experience of reality. So anything that's been created, and this is what I think of everything I've seen so far, is that word ersatz. It's kind of but it's just not there. It's functional. It can be functional, but it doesn't have the same. It doesn't have the feeling or the emotion because it can't see. It's not seeing the world. It's just processing stuff. It will happen though, eventually, that they will, because it just feels inevitable, they will achieve genuine machine intelligence. But when that happens, I still don't think we have anything to worry about as people, because AI will have a lot of really interesting things to say, but it will be said entirely from a machine perspective. It won't be a human perspective, it will be a machine one. And so I think as creators, we're safe. The camera didn't kill painting. Or another analogy I like to give people is Jimi Hendrix can play the guitar way better than I could, but it never stopped me playing the guitar, right? What the problem with AI is, and this is the real problem, is that AI is seen as this great, amazing thing by people who want to be able to do things but didn't invest the time in learning how to do them. And so they think it's great. And so where that's problematic is that when those people control the purse strings, they're going to look for AI to do it. And so for a lot of people who are creatives, our bread and butter work is often advertising stuff. And when a bean counter can say we can get this thing done and hey, it's good enough for me, done by a machine, they're not going to pay a human to do it. And that's the worrying part for AI. Will AI ever be able to edit as well as a person? No. Will people be happy with an advert that AI edits? Probably. That's concerning because, commercials always used to pay us to live so that we could then do our little personal projects you don't get paid much money for. So that's the part that concerns me about AI. But having said that, because I've been arguing with my wife about this quite a lot in recent times, I think that people don't my gut feeling is people don't really like AI. I mean, consumers don't really like AI generated stuff. I feel like people want a human connection, and they don't get that from looking at stuff generated by a machine. It's great for if you're a too online person who thinks it's hilarious to see a meme of a dog driving a car. Awesome. Aha, great lols. But if it's something selling you something or trying to interface with you, I think that there's a gap there that people aren't satisfied by, and that means that they're going to look for stuff made by people. At least I hope that's the case.
I think you're right. I think a lot of people, especially now, I remember when there's a massive trend where I'm living where a lot of businesses in Argentina are using AI ads and people actually hate them. They hate them. You see them, they visibly comment saying this is the worst thing imaginable. Why are they making this? Because it does take out a lot of the emotion. And this is the thing, that if you can build emotion in an ad, that's a real craft in its own right. And I'm always going to use the example because I lived in the UK for a bit, is like the classic thing, the M&S Christmas ads. I don't think AI is ever going to be able to pull off the absolute emotional tolls, which is watching one of those ads, because it kills me every time that those come out. And I'm like, geez, I don't even live in the UK, and I'm like, I feel like I really need a winter Christmas. Like it's horrendous, mate. It's horrendous. And I think this is where I love doing the final moment here, Francis, which is the full circle, because you went from working on Pūkana, doing all those crazy hours, doing all those crazy animations, learning the craft of editing, and now to working on features, doing some crazy stuff from the America's Cup, among others. Has your creative approach, do you feel like it's changed a lot from those first couple of days, or do you feel like, if anything, it's just kind of been shaven down and crafted into like the ideal structure that you have now?
Yeah, good question. I think that when I was first kind of starting out, I think it's a thing that people routinely fall into the trap of when they first start doing something, is a kind of look at this approach, I guess, like like they want their, and I see this a lot on YouTube videos on editing, say for instance, people trying to build these transitions or these flashy things that you really notice, so it's like, hey, look at this thing you can see. And one of the things I think that's one of the more important lessons you can learn as an editor is that actually people shouldn't be noticing your cuts. It should just be bang, and you should be transported into the moment, and you should be living in the moment, and you shouldn't see the craft. The craft should be an invisible hand that's guiding you. And I think that's the thing I really learnt over the years, and the importance of structure and story. And one of the things I've really been thinking about a lot recently has been how important cause and effect is in everything. If this, then that. Why this? So I don't know if it's not really been because of any one earth-shaking moment. It has definitely been a series of small evolutions over the course of time, but that's definitely where I am now, which I think is different from where I was 20 years ago. So,
if you like the podcast, I'd love for you to leave a 5-star review on your preferred podcast platform and let me know your thoughts on the show. Don't forget, you can reach out to me via Instagram at beyondbroadcastpod or via email at beyondbroadcastpod@gmail.com. Until next time, take it easy.